cannot tell you how excited I am to start our fall programming off with our writer series and Ashley Weaver. So thank you everybody for being here. My name's Aaron Espinoza. I have the distinct privilege of being the executive director of the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival, as well as the director of the Rancho Mirage Library and Observatory. Before we get started today, can you please turn off your phones, silence them? Ooh, wow, look at all those people reacting. I love it. Just a few more things before we get started. Ashley will be signing and personalizing books. She has said it's okay to take photos as well. We have a podium right up here at the very front, so if you can, just please line up against this wall, and our staff will get you over to her as soon as we can kind of get some of the other patrons out of the community room. So she will be doing the book signing. Thanks to our partners at Follett. In the back, we have her first book of the series, as well as previous copies that she has written. So there's lots of opportunities to get Ashley's books today. The Writers Series, what is it intended for and what are we doing here? It is a give back to the community from the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival. We were trying to look at ways to get more authors into the library, not necessarily during our Writers Festival. And so thanks to our great founder, Jamie Kabler, and our director of programming, Deborah Deja. We have over 14 authors coming before the end of this calendar year. At each of those events, we will be giving away 200 books. So that equates to just over 2,800 books giving out to the community thanks to the Writers Festival. For more information on the writers and who's coming and when they're coming, please go to our website, www.rmwritersfest.org, and you'll get more information in regards to when those are coming. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our city council. In attendance today, we have council member Ted Weil. And we also have council member Steve Downs. Ashley is an Edgar Award-nominated best-selling author of Amory Ames mystery and the Electra McDonnell series. In addition to being popular by authors of mystery books, she is also the branch manager of the Allen Parish Libraries in Louisiana. Ashley has worked in libraries since the age of 14 and has enjoyed her time at each and every library. Please join me in welcoming Ashley Weaver.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I want to echo Aaron's thanks to the Rancho Mirage Writers Festival for inviting me. This is so exciting. And also thanks to Aaron and the library for having me. I'm a big fan of libraries. I'm a librarian myself, as he mentioned, and consider myself kind of a connoisseur of libraries. Whenever I travel, I like to visit different libraries and see the buildings that they're in and what kind of collections they have, and see if I can maybe sneak a few of their ideas home to use at our library. So this has been a lot of fun for me. And I want to thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to come. I'm so excited to be here. I've never been to the Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage area before, and this is kind of, I think, one of my first trips to sort of a desert area. And as I was driving around last night and looking out early this morning, I was thinking about all the books I've read where writers have kind of painted a very romantic picture of what the desert looks like, and I could really see that with the light playing over the mountains and all the beautiful trees. It's just a very beautiful area. So this is a lot of fun for me. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of my story, kind of how both mysteries and libraries have sort of played into my writing over the years, and then I think we should have time for some questions at the end if anyone has any questions. But I always say that libraries and mysteries have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My parents would take me to the library a lot as a child, and even very young, I remember having kind of this wonder that I could go into this building filled with books on all kinds of amazing topics, and I could bring home a big stack for free. So that was always so exciting to me. And I went through a lot of phases as a young reader, which I suppose a lot of young readers do, but I remember checking out books on mummies and ancient Egypt because I wanted to be an archaeologist. And then I checked out books on rocks, and I would try to memorize what they looked like and see what I could find in my backyard. And I still remember obsidian. That's the one I remember to this day. So, but throughout all these different phases that I went through, the one constant that I always loved was mysteries. And so I started out very, very young. The first mystery I remember loving was Richard Scarry's Great Steamboat Mystery. And it was a story of, I want to say it was a little pig, and she got her pearl necklace stolen on a boat, and the little detectives had to find it. And so then I remember I read Cam Jansen, who was a little girl with a photographic memory, and whenever she would see suspicious occurrences or crimes in progress, she would look at them and she would say, click, and she would take a mental picture, and she'd be able to access it later to help solve the mystery. And then, of course, I loved Encyclopedia Brown. I would like to read his little stories, and then I could go try to solve it, figure out the solution before I flipped to the back to see if I was right. And I read Boxcar Children. I read the Bobbsey Twins. Actually, the Bobbsey Twins were kind of one of my very early inspirations. The very first story I ever remember writing, my dad had one of those very old printers. I don't know if you remember the green and white striped printer paper. But he had some of that, and I tore it out, and I made a little book, and I sort of plagiarized the Bobbsey Twins. I had a boy and girl detective, and they were solving some kind of mystery, and I don't really remember many of the details, but I do remember having this realization that it was amazing to take a plot from my head, even though the twins were plagiarized. I could take the story from my head and put it down on paper and, have a book that I had written, and so that was sort of my earliest memory of remembering wanting to be a writer. And then, of course, there was Nancy Drew. She was, I think, instrumental in a lot of young girls' childhoods. I found a journal that I had written. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I grew up in Wisconsin, and so I had written in the journal, we went sledding today, and it was so cold and fun. Now I can't wait to curl up with a hot cup of tea and a Nancy Drew book. And so when I found that, I realized I really haven't changed much in the last 30 years. I still like my tea and and mysteries. And so then I moved on, of course, to other writers. There was, of course, Agatha Christie, who is one of my early favorites. Got introduced to me by a coworker in the library, told me which one I should read first, and it was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And after that, I was hooked. So just sort of mysteries have always been there, and I've kind of looked into why it might be, I've thought about this, what it is that draws people to mysteries. And my one theory is that mysteries allow the reader to take part in the book in a way that's particularly unique to that genre. You can, of course, be fully immersed in any sort of book you're reading, and I love that about many different genres, but with a mystery, you're getting to take part in solving the crime yourself. You're there with the detective, getting the clues as they get them, and trying to work out what the solution is, discover who the culprit is, the killer, and so I really love that you can take part in a unique way in mysteries. And I also have a theory about why I in particular like mysteries. My mom told me a couple years ago a story about when I was being born. And she said she was at the hospital and in labor, and they were in the delivery room, and there was a TV in there. And she said she kept getting frustrated with my dad and her sister because there was a movie on the TV, and they kept watching it while she was trying to have a baby. They were watching, and they kept, they would talk to her, and then they'd get drawn back, and they were just really interested to see what the end of the movie was going to be. And she said that movie was the 1956 version of Witness for the Prosecution. Which is, of course, Billy Wilder's adaptation of Agatha Christie's play. And when she told me this, that had been one of my favorite movies for years. I didn't realize, even realizing this. But so I kind of feel like maybe being brought into the world to Agatha Christie's dialogue has kind of led me on this path to be a librarian and loving mysteries. So two things happened. Again, sort of my love of libraries and writing mysteries joining together my freshman year of high school. As Aaron mentioned, I started working in libraries when I was 14, and there was a part-time position open at my local library, and so I figured, well, I already love being at the library and I spend a lot of time here, so why not get paid for it? So I applied for the job and I got it, and I worked a few hours after school, just in the evenings, putting books away, working at the front desk, things like that. But little did I know that that was going to be sort of the start of a career for me and really give me that love of librarianship that's lasted to this day. And also that same year was the year I wrote what would become my first full-length novel, which has never seen the light of day, but it was what I like to call a gangster mystery romance. And it was set in Prohibition-era Chicago. And I grew up watching a lot of old movies. as I mentioned, loving witness for the prosecution, but at the library, I would go and I would request big stacks of VHS of all the old movies that the libraries had, and I would bring them home and watch them. And so I liked a little bit of everything. I watched musicals, I watched comedies and dramas, but I went through a whole phase where I was really into all the old gangster films. And so it was like Edward G. Robinson and Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney, and so I think that's kind of where the inspiration for this first book came from. So in this book, my heroine, her boyfriend worked for a mob boss, and he got wrongfully convicted of a murder and sentenced to the electric chair. And so she was going to try to find out the true killer and free her boyfriend with the help of his mob boss. So I would sort of work on that book in the evenings and on weekends, and I would print it out, and I would bring it to school, and my friends would pass it around the lunch table. So that was sort of my first taste of writing for an audience and getting feedback and understanding how much fun it was to take these stories that people looked forward to reading and people were interested in seeing what would happen next. So I continued working in libraries, continued writing. I ended up moving to Louisiana from Wisconsin and working on an English degree there. And then at the same time, I was working in 2 different public libraries. And I kind of feel like working in libraries is a little bit like being a detective sometimes. Because one of my favorite sayings is librarians don't know the answer to everything, but they know how to find the answer to everything. So I worked at a reference desk for a while, and I loved that because people would call in with all kinds of questions. You never knew what you were going to get. We had, like, one person wanted to call in and know the price of gold every morning. He would call in to find out. And one time I had someone call in wanting to know how they could donate their body to science. So that was interesting. So I'm sure every librarian has some interesting stories. But one of my favorites is one time I was making copies for a woman, and the copier at that time was behind the front desk. So she was handing me her papers, and I was copying them and handing them back. And I noticed that they were like a little bit gritty, kind of like dusty or something, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Well, she was standing with a person behind me, and she turned and she said, I can tell which ones are the copies and which ones are my originals, because my originals have my dog's ashes on them. So I don't know what the story behind that was, but I guess the moral is that sometimes you find answers to mysteries you wish you hadn't. So I continued working in libraries. I graduated with a degree in English and then decided, since I had spent so much time in libraries and really loved what I did, I went ahead and got my library and information science degree from LSU. And I graduated in 2011 with that. And that was the year that I started working on my very first published novel, which is Murder at the Brightwell. And I like to say that it all started with a dream, which is not as cool as it sounds, but I had a dream one night with a woman named Amory Ames, and I didn't remember anything else about the dream when I woke up, but I thought that would be a great name for a character. So I sat down and kind of started to write the story, and I knew right away what kind of story I wanted to write. First of all, I knew I wanted it to be set in 1930s England. Of course, being a big fan of Agatha Christie, I love the golden age of mystery. And being a big fan of old movies, growing up, I sort of, as a younger person, really enjoyed that, what I call Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire aesthetic, which is the women in evening gowns and the men in tuxedos, dancing in fancy nightclubs and sort of the elegance and glamour of it. And then, of course, as I got older and understood more of like the, social things going on, the period between the wars, the Great Depression, all that kind of thing, it's just a really fascinating time period. So I knew I wanted to set it in 1930s England. And I also had a very clear idea of who I wanted Amory Ames to be. From the moment that I thought of her, I knew that she was going to be a kind of high society lady. She's very confident, poised, at home in her upper class surroundings, but also not afraid to get into a little danger when the situation calls for it. She's ready to solve a mystery, and she has a sense of justice, that she wants to see justice done. And then the third thing I knew right away was that I wanted her to have an interesting marriage. The very first line that I ever wrote on my computer is still the first line of the first book, and it says, "It is an impossibly great trial to be married to a man one loves and hates in equal proportions." And so Amory is married to a man named Milo. At the beginning of the series, they've been married 5 years, and the honeymoon is very much over. And and so this is sort of my starting point, because I thought it was interesting. A lot of stories, of course, I love a happily ever after. I love a good romance, but I thought it would be interesting to take two people who are wealthy, sophisticated, beautiful people who meet and fall in love, as people do, but kind of a whirlwind romance, and then look at the repercussions of marrying someone that you don't know very well. So that's kind of where this series starts out with Amory Ames. And in the first book, Amory was actually engaged to a man named Gil, and she broke off the engagement to marry her husband Milo. And so in the first book, Gil comes back and says, my sister's about to marry someone who's no good, like your husband. Do you want to come and help me convince her that she shouldn't marry him? So she goes with him to the Brightwell Hotel. And, of course, a murder happens, and then Amory's husband, Milo, shows up to complicate things. And so that was my first book, Murder at the Brightwell. So I had written it kind of just for fun because I enjoyed writing, and I had a friend who was writing a book, and we were sort of working on them together. But then we decided to go ahead and send them out to agents. And so I ended up getting an agent, signing with an agent, and then I got a 2-book deal, and then they asked me for 2 more books. And then there was another 3 books, so there's been 7 in the series. But I associate so many great memories of being a writer and writing the mystery with my time at the library. Because I was at the library when I got an email from my agent that we had a book deal. And of course, I couldn't be loud in the library, but I did jump up from my desk and do a silent scream. So that was a dream come true. And then I was at work when I found out that the first book had been nominated for an Edgar Award, which was such a huge honor. And I went to the Edgar Awards in New York City, and the first thing I thought when I was in this room is, this is all people whose books I've shelved for so many years. So that was very exciting. And then also I catalog books at my library, so when I got my first copy of my book in and I was able to catalog it and put it on the shelves at the library, that was a really exciting moment for me. So, and it still never gets old, even today when new copies of my books come in, it's still pretty surreal that I get to do that, put them on the shelves like that. So that was very exciting. And so the Amory Ames series, it takes place over 7 books, and Amory and Milo have some different adventures as they work on the troubles in their marriage, but they go to different places. One book takes place in Paris, where they're dealing with the death of a famous parfumier, and there's one book that takes place in New York City, and I did get to incorporate some of my gangsters in that one, I would just like to say. I was very excited because I got right in at the tail end of Prohibition, so we got a gangster in that one, and so that's sort of how Amory and Milo's story has gone. And then my editor approached me about starting a second series, and so that's the book that we have here today. Well, that's the second book in the series, the Electra McDonnell series. I was inspired to write this book. I had been reading a book by Ben McIntyre called Agent Zigzag. I was kind of in one of my reading phases, and I was reading all kinds of World War II nonfiction. And so Agent Zigzag is the story of a man named Eddie Chapman, who was a petty criminal, and he was arrested and imprisoned on the Channel Islands for one of his crimes. Well, then the Channel Islands were occupied by the Nazis. And so the Nazis told him, do you want to get out of jail? If you do, we will train you to be a spy and send you back to England. And so Eddie said, sure, I'll get out of prison. And so they took Eddie to Germany. They trained him to be a spy. They trained him to parachute. They dropped him into England, and he went immediately to the authorities and said, the Nazis want me to spy on you. Do you want me to spy on them? So he became a great double agent for the British during World War II. So while I was reading that, I was just really impressed with the idea of someone who, with sort of, you might say, loose moral fiber, who, wasn't really too worried about the law, too worried about the things that you would have to do that were against the law. But when push came to shove, he was determined to, back his country and fight for what was right and, work against the Nazis. And so I thought that would be an amazing idea for kind of a fictionalized version. So my book is about Electra McDonnell. She goes by Ellie, and she belongs to a family of locksmiths by day, safecrackers by night. And in the first book, A Peculiar Combination, Ellie and her uncle are caught during the middle of a job, which turns out to be a setup, and the government tells them, you can either work for us, retrieving some papers from a safe before they fall into Nazi hands, or you can go to prison. So of course that's an easy choice. And Electra and her uncle decide to aid the British cause, and then even after their job is done, she realizes that she enjoys this. She enjoys being able to work on behalf of her country, and so the story takes off from there. And so that was the first book, A Peculiar Combination. The second book is The Key to Deceit, and in this book, Ellie is approached by Major Ramsey, who's her handler, and potential love interest. And he says that there's been a woman found dead in the Thames with a mysterious bracelet on her wrist, and it's locked, and they need her to come unlock it. So this kind of involves them in this whole story of rooting out a spy ring that's in London. So it's been a lot of fun writing the Electra series. I just actually finished the third one and turned it into my publisher, and I have at least one more after that. And so it's been a really neat experience writing Electra after Amory, because they're two very different women. Amory's very self-assured and poised, and she's very aware of the bounds of society that she lives in, and for the most part, she tries to stay within them. And Electra's just not afraid to break the rules. And so they're very different, and both series are in first person, so that was kind of fun, switching from Amory's voice to Electra's voice to try and figure out, every once in a while I'll write a line for Electra, and I think, oh, that sounds more like something Amory would say. I'm going to have to shift it up a little bit. But it's been really, really exciting to just take my love of mysteries and be able to write these series, and my love of history and all the reading that I've done over the years. And so I feel like my love of libraries, which I'm still working in libraries today. I'm at a library in Louisiana. I've been there since 2005, so it's been quite a while. And so to have my love of libraries, to have a career in librarianship, and to have a career as a writer are just two things that I always wanted to do, and I love that I'm able to do them both. So I guess you could kind of say it's been a dream come true. So thank you so much. Did we have any questions? Yes.
Do you decide on the ending first and then go backward to the information?
Not usually. I don't do any writing in order. Usually I write all different scenes and then kind of like rearrange them into the kind of how I want them. But generally I try and wait till close to the end to decide like who the culprit's going to be, because my hope is if I'm surprised, you'll be surprised too. Once in a while, there's been, in the first book, I won't give anything away, I don't know if anyone's read it, but someone who ended up being the culprit, it was a last-minute decision, and I had to sacrifice them for the cause because I needed someone to be the villain. Yes.
Do you travel to the cities that you took places? Did you go to Paris? Did you go to Paris? Did you go to London? You were in London once?
I've been to London and once, and I've been to Paris twice, but I hadn't been to either of them before I started. And that's where being a librarian comes in handy. So there's definitely, I always say there's so much information at my fingertips, a lot of research that I'm able to do. And then, there's so much you can find online. And but it was nice to be able to go after the fact. I think in one of the books, Amory's husband, Milo, was staying at the Ritz, and then I was able to go and have tea at the Ritz when I went, and so that was kind of fun to sort of tie it together. But it's fun, even if it was after the fact, it was still kind of fun to see some of my locations.
Actually, why do you call your mystery writing cozy mysteries?
My books sort of fall into the cozy mystery genre because they are not too violent, not too graphic, not too, it's sort of like when I was reading my Nancy Drew book with a cup of tea. You could sit down with a cup of tea and read this and not be too grossed out by anything that happens in it. Yeah. I have thought about it. I do think it would be fun, and I'm sure that, as any librarian can attest, some crazy stuff happens in the library. So it's possible. I don't have anything in particular. I have a couple of maybe potentially standalone story ideas that I've had. I don't know if you've ever heard of National Novel Writing Month. It happens every November. It's a program, and you write a 50,000-word novel in the month of November. And so it boils down to 1,667 words a day. And I've participated, I think, for the last, 14 years. And so I have 14 junky 50,000-word novels that could maybe potentially be turned into something at some point. You never know. But it kind of depends on my publisher, the contracts that I get. And so right now I'm contracted for one more book in the Electra series besides the one I just turned in. So at that point, I'm kind of got to see if I'm going to need to wrap it up or if I'm going to, proceed further. So with the Amory series, it was interesting because she's already married. There's not really like a romance that I have to kind of develop and tie a bow on throughout the series. With the Electra series, she's got a couple potential love interests, and then she's also got some mystery in her own personal background. And so that's stuff that I'm going to have to figure out how to wrap up before the series ends to make sure that, you know, nobody's left hanging with regards to any of that stuff. So it's a new challenge. Yes.
Could you elaborate on writing scenes and what that does in the continuity, how you put continuity to the scenes?
When I'm writing my scenes out of order? Well, with like my Amory Ames series, generally kind of with a lot of cozy mysteries, it's sort of like, you know, there's going to be a limited amount of suspects, and you know she's going to have to talk to each of these suspects. So generally I can say, oh, I don't feel like working on this now, but maybe I'll go have her talk to this guy today, and so I'll write a conversation between her and that character, and then eventually I can put all the scenes together and then kind of, you know, edit in any extra clues that need to be added in, or take out something that never gets addressed. You know, eventually it has to go back, you have to go back over and smooth things out. But I find it's a way I avoid writer's block, is because if I get stuck, I just go write a different part of the story. Well, I work 7:30 to 3:30, and then I'm a night owl, so I do most of my writing in the evenings. And I try to do sometimes, I have a year between books generally, so sometimes I'll pick a month and I'll write 1,000 words a day on that day, and then I know I'll have 30,000 words to start out with. And then generally, because I'm a procrastinator, the last 3 or 4 months before the book is due is when I really work hard on it. Yes?
Hello. I was curious, as a librarian, I'm sure that you know a lot of research tools to research period in particular in place that other people may not know. And I write nonfiction that involves history, and there's newspapers.com, and maybe this is a little too geeky a question, but have you found as a librarian some really great sources that are particularly good in giving you information you need about places, years, and factual information on which to build the fiction?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know that I have like a particular place that I like you mentioned, I like a lot of newspaper. It's nice, newspaper counts. It's good to go back and see. You know, I try to see, and now I can't remember, one thing that's been particularly helpful to me with the Electra series, and I can't remember who it published it off the top of my head, but it's a detailed map of all the bombings that took place during the Blitz in London, and kind of what days they happened and how many happened and that sort of thing. So that's particularly helpful, especially in this series, because you don't, you know, even though it's fictional, I don't really want, you know, something blowing up on a day it didn't really happen or things like that. I try to make sure that I'm working in the real details into the story.
You mentioned that you love old films. Have you been approached for dramatic versions of any of the episodes you've created so far?
No, not so far, but you never know. That is a good point. Well, it just kind of worked out that way. When I started writing the series, it was 3 or 4 years later that I finally got a chance to take an international trip. So it just kind of at that point, I was just happy to be able to go and do that. But, you know, I'm keep it in mind. Yes.
In the Sunday New York Times, every week when they do the book review, they have a special page about an author, and one of the questions they ask is, if you were having a dinner party, who are the 3 people that you would invite? So I'm asking you, who would you invite and why?
Oh, that's a hard question to come up off the top of my head. Well, if I'm relating it to this series, I think I would have to have Winston Churchill there, because this takes place in London during World War II, so he would be a very good source of information for sure. Let's invite Agatha Christie. She's my favorite. I mean, I guess if we're picking people that are dead. Am I allowed to do that? Oh, yes, definitely. I would love to have Agatha Christie there. And, I'd have to think about my third person. This is a good question for sure. Oh, I don't know. Let me get back to you in a second.
Oh, besides yourself, who is your favorite author, authoress?
Well, I keep saying Agatha Christie about everything, but she's really one of my favorite authors just because I found her so young and she was such an inspiration to me, and I just love her stories and I love her characterizations and the way she does dialogue, all that kind of thing. But and then also, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of Ben McIntyre. I love reading like everything that he publishes. I auto-buy it because I'm ready to read the next one. It's just so fascinating because all his books are nonfiction, but they read like spy thrillers. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right. Well, Ashley, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I do want to remind everybody that there are additional copies for sale of Ashley's books, and she will be up front here signing right now. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.